Have you ever imagined standing in the middle of a strange town, where every set of eyes measured you only to see what you were still worth to trade that night in Red Hollow? Eliza Rowan understood what it meant to be cornered. Hunger clawed her gut like a wild animal. Her bare feet bled from rocks and gravel, and the cotton dress that once was white had become nothing more than rags torn at the hem, stained with dust. She leaned against the cold wooden wall of the saloon, listening to the laughter and the sour smell of smoke and whiskey spilling out like mockery. Few things cut deeper than knowing you are about to beg, not for pity, but just for the chance to survive one more day. If you've ever wanted to know how thin the line is between pride and despair, then stay with me for this story. Before we go further, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tell me where you're watching from. Because Eliza's journey isn't just hers, it's a mirror for every soul that's ever been pushed to the edge. Evening fell over Red Hollow in a copper glow. Wind scraped down the main street, kicking dust through the ruts left by wagon wheels. A handful of men leaned on the saloon railing, eyes heavy with whiskey and want, watching any woman that passed as if she were just another item to be bartered. Eliza had endured their stares for 2 days. The proud lift of her chin on the first day was gone now, stripped away by the gnawing in her belly, the dryness in her throat, and the cruel truth that pride couldn't be eaten. She had once promised herself never trade her body for survival, but in a place like Red Hollow, oaths like that were straw in a storm. Every step on the hard-packed road tore her feet raw, every time she touched the torn fabric of her dress. Shame burned hotter. The whispers, the laughter, the spit at her feet all told her the same thing: she had nothing left. And all it would take was one word, one offer, and the last of her dignity would be gone. Behind the saloon, where lamplight didn't reach, the alley stank of spilled liquor. That's where she hid, binding herself in shadows to escape the weight of men's eyes. But shadows couldn't still the hunger. When the door banged open and a drunk staggered out, his gaze sliding over her like greasy hands, Eliza felt herself tip toward the abyss. Her tongue was dry, her throat knotted, and for a moment her vision blurred with shame too old for tears. She couldn't cry anymore. Tears never filled an empty stomach. She stepped out of the dark, knees weak, breath ragged as though her heart might burst. The words clawed their way to the edge of her mouth: "I'll do anything. Just don't let me starve." Saying it was filthier than dust, filthier than blood. It tasted like defeat, and yet she knew no other way. The laughter inside, the off-key piano, the slam of boots on the boardwalk, all of it blurred together. Eliza hugged herself, both to keep a shred of warmth and to cover what the torn dress could not. Each time the saloon door swung open, the light splashed across her gaunt face, displaying her desperation for all to see. Men laughed at that sight, and their laughter shattered what was left of her pride like a whiskey glass smashed against the floor. Red Hollow never spared the weak. It stared at you with the eyes of a tax collector. What else do you have to give? Nothing. Then you're no better than dust. And in that back alley, Eliza Rowan had reached the moment when she would have to answer. Answer with her pride. Answer with her last tear. Or answer with the body she had once sworn to protect. At the very moment Eliza thought she had lost everything, a figure stepped apart from the men gathered at the saloon door. No drunken laughter, no filthy stare, no cheap promise. Just one man standing still, leaning against a wooden post where the alley met the main street. The last light of day slid across the brim of his hat, hiding most of his face, leaving only the hard line of his jaw and the glint of steel in his eyes. Eliza froze, heart pounding, wild. Fear cut through her first thought. What if he was just like the rest? What if that silent gaze was more dangerous than any grin? Her throat was dry. But the words slipped out anyway. Thin as a breath, I'll do anything. Just don't let me starve. She braced for laughter, for him to call the others to watch her beg, but nothing came. Silence stretched, filled only by the wind shoving grit across the planks. Then his voice came, low and steady, not a hint of mockery. "Put your shoes on if you've got any. You're coming with me." Eliza blinked. The words didn't fit. No bargain, no price. Just a flat command, like he was telling her to fetch water. And before she could even grasp it, he stepped forward, slipped off his long, dust-beaten duster, and laid it over her shoulders. The coat was heavy, carrying the scent of horses, sweat, and the open trail. It wasn't the stench of whiskey, nor the cheap perfume she'd known before. It smelled of miles, of sky, of freedom. Eliza clutched it with both hands as if it might vanish and take the last shred of hope with it. Her throat locked, tears threatening but held back. Tears were dangerous. They broke fragile things. He didn't touch her again, didn't leer or ask for anything. He simply turned, walking slow but certain toward the edge of town. He didn't look back, didn't signal. He just walked like a man who already knew she would follow. And she did. Because staying behind meant ruin. Following him, whatever trap it might be, looked too much like salvation to ignore. At the road's edge, she saw 2 horses tied at a dry trough. A strong bay gelding named Ranger, and a pack mare, Mabel, patient and steady. The man moved to Ranger, loosened the reins, and swung into the saddle with the ease of long habit. Then he turned, holding out his hand. Eliza hesitated. That hand was broad, calloused, sun-browned. It could crush her, or save her. Questions tore through her. Why was he helping? What would he want later? When would the cost come due? But her stomach was cramping with hunger, her feet torn raw, and Red Hollow's shadow pressed at her back. She had no other choice. Slowly, she placed her trembling hand into his. In one sure motion, he pulled her up behind him. Strength surged through his grip, the kind that told her he could hurt her if he wished, but he didn't. She settled onto the worn leather, clutching the coat tighter, her face close to his back. "Hold on," he said, voice almost lost in the wind. And she did, arms circling the coat, cheek pressed near his shoulder. The town fell away behind them, its laughter and music fading to nothing but memory. Ahead lay only the rhythm of hoofbeats, the rattle of tack, and the steady breath of the man who had given her, for the first time in months, something that felt like a chance. Suspicion still gnawed at her. No man helped without wanting something. But with every mile, with every gust of wind tangling her hair, a small spark inside her refused to die. Maybe, just maybe, fate had finally shown a crack of mercy. The road out of Red Hollow stretched long in the cold wind, dust curling in every gust. Eliza clung to Jonah's back, her heart still heavy with questions left unspoken. In the fire-red dusk, he said little, only now and then glancing back with eyes the color of winter steel. The horses' hooves struck a steady beat on the hard earth, like a slow drum pulling them further from the pit of darkness she had just escaped. When night finally settled, a cabin appeared on a low rise near Cedar Bluff. Small, 1 room wide, its patched roof held firm against the wind. Beside it stood a rough lean-to barn and a stretch of fence line fading into the shadows. Eliza stared at the place, her chest tightening. She had known filthy inns, back rooms where men passed out in their own vomit. But this cabin plain, kept clean, felt different, and that difference made her uneasy. Could someone like her, ragged and disgraced, step into such a space? Jonah reined in, swung down, and reached for her. His hand was firm, but never lingered. He tied the horses, pushed the door open with a creak, and nodded for her to enter first, inside. The smell of dry wood, smoke, and old coffee wrapped around her. The room was simple, a narrow bed against the back wall, A rough-hewn table scarred by tool marks, 2 mismatched chairs, a black stove, and a small shelf with a few neatly stacked tins. No clutter, no filth, just a space shaped by a man who lived with order and silence. Eliza braced herself for the moment she feared most, that look, that claim, the reminder she was nothing but payment. But it never came. Jonah hung his hat, shook out his coat, and bent to lay a fire. The flame snapped, pushing shadows back from his face, etching the hard lines of his jaw. From a small wooden box, he pulled dry beans, salt pork, and a heel of bread. Into the iron pot they went, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. "Sit," he said simply. Sliding a chair toward her, Eliza obeyed, clutching the duster still warm from his shoulders. The smell of cooking filled the room, rich enough to make her stomach twist when he set a plate in front of her, beans steaming, meat glistening. She froze. How long had it been since someone fed her without smirk or touch? Her throat tightened, and when the first bite hit her tongue, she had to bite back tears. Jonah didn't watch her. He ate only after she'd taken enough to ease the edge of her hunger. The silence was not cruel. It steadied her. No bargains, no questions, only the scrape of spoons and the whistle of wind through the cracks. When she tried to rise and clear the plates, her hands shook too hard. Jonah shook his head. Leave it. Rest. From a chest in the corner, he drew out a pair of worn boots and 2 pairs of wool socks. Picked these up last spring. Too small for me. Might fit you. He set them down without so much as a glance at her torn feet, then turned back to the fire. Eliza stared at the boots. When she slid her hands over the rough leather, warmth spread through her chest, strange and sharp. Could a man really be kind for nothing in return? She wasn't sure she believed it, yet the evidence sat heavy in her lap. Night dropped hard. Jonah unrolled a blanket near the stove and left the bed to her, in the dim lantern light. He looked at her once and said, voice even, carved like stone, "You're safe here. No one touches you." Not even me, her heart stilled. She wanted to doubt him, had every reason to, but in the cold silence of Cedar Bluff, that promise was like a spark catching in a long-dead fire. That night, Eliza lay beneath a quilt, smelling of cedar, eyes drifting shut not with fear, but with something she had nearly forgotten relief. And for the first time in months, she understood a heart could tremble not from terror, but from a fragile, almost joyful hope. The first dawn at Cedar Bluff came with the chill of morning fog. Eliza woke not to drunken shouting or rough hands, but to the smell of coffee rising from the black iron stove in the corner. Jonah had been up long before, his tall frame outlined against the pale light, every movement steady, practiced. He didn't look at her, only said quietly, "Water's hot. Eat, then rest a little more." Eliza froze. Never had a morning begun so gently. She sat at the rough table, wrapping her fingers around a steaming cup. The bitter taste burned her tongue, but instead of disgust, it filled her with warmth. A piece of stale bread, a bowl of beans, things that once seemed ordinary, now felt as precious as a banquet. After breakfast, Eliza looked around the room. Dust lay thin on the table, ash scattered under the stove. For the first time in years, she felt she might contribute, not just exist like a burden. She reached for the broom. Jonah paused, glanced once, but didn't stop her. He only gave a small nod and went back to tying rope for the fence. That silence wasn't disdain, it was recognition. The day passed in a quiet rhythm. Eliza swept the floor, patched the torn hem of her dress, washed dishes in a basin of warm water. Simple tasks, yet each one brought her a strange sensation she was living like a human being again. Every stitch she set into the fabric felt as if she were sewing pieces of her own dignity back together. Outside, Jonah worked the land. The steady ring of his hammer carried over the hill as he drove posts into the fence line. Other times, he climbed onto the roof, broad shoulders braced against the sun, fixing each board with calm determination. Or he hauled buckets from the well, muscles straining with each lift. He did it all without complaint, without show work, seemed to be the air he breathed. Watching him, Eliza felt a quiet respect grow inside her. At noon they ate together in silence, not the heavy silence of Red Hollow, but something warmer, easier. The wind whispered at the window. The soup steamed in the iron pot. Eliza sat across from Jonah and felt a surprising calm settle over her. It struck her that for the first time in years, she was sitting at a table like a person who belonged there. By afternoon, when the sun stretched gold across the hills, Eliza hung blankets outside while Jonah cut wood for the fire. Ordinary chores. Nothing grand, but each act whispered a truth she had long forgotten she still had worth. She still had the strength to live with purpose. At night, they settled by the fire again. Jonah sharpened his knife. Eliza stitched a seam. Words were scarce, yet the silence no longer pressed heavy. It was soft, like a song played under the surface of their thoughts. When she looked up and caught his eyes, she gave a faint smile. He didn't smile back, but the lines around his eyes eased, as if some unspoken joy had passed between them. Day by day, life at Cedar Bluff unfolded in this rhythm, and it was within that rhythm that Eliza began to feel a rebirth. The hunger and shame of Red Hollow faded, replaced by the fragile belief that she might begin again. Her dignity, once shattered, was being mended piece by her own hands. Each morning, as sunlight streamed through the small window, Eliza felt something stirring in her chest. Not fear, not despair, but a spark, small, steady, and stubborn that life could still be different, if she dared to hold on to it. That afternoon, black clouds rolled in from the far ridge, casting a heavy shadow over all of Cedar Bluff. The air dropped sharp and cold, thick with the smell of damp earth, and the wind carried the bite of coming rain. Eliza was gathering blankets when the cabin door slammed against the wall. Jonah stepped inside, gray eyes grim. "Storm's coming," he said flat, sharp as a blade, even before she could answer. The wind struck the walls hard enough to make the roof groan. Eliza clutched the duster tight, her heart racing. She had heard talk of storms like this, that they could rip down trees and tear a roof off like paper. But hearing about it was nothing like standing inside as it bore down on you. Jonah dropped his coat on the table and seized a coil of rope. "I've got to get on the roof. You stay in here. Keep the fire alive. You can't, Jonah." "No." Eliza's voice broke with fear. The thought of him fighting the storm alone locked her chest tight. But Jonah only shook his head, leaving no room for argument. "If this roof gives, we lose our shelter. The fire keeps you alive. I'll handle the rest." He shoved the door open and vanished into the roar. For a breath, Eliza saw him silhouetted in lightning broad shoulders braced against the gale. Then the door slammed back shut. Outside, thunder split the sky. Rain hammered the roof in heavy sheets, each blow like a fist. The walls rattled. Smoke from the stove sucked back into the room until her eyes stung. Eliza dropped to her knees beside the fire, hands trembling as she threw on more wood, feeding flames that seemed far too fragile against the storm's fury. Every shriek of wind made her flinch. Every groan of timber froze her blood. Was Jonah still on the roof? Was he holding on? Or had the storm already torn him away? Her mind filled with images she didn't want, of his body thrown down into the mud. She clenched her hands together, whispering silent prayers into the roar. Then came the sound of hammer blows above steady, defiant, each one cutting through the storm. With every strike, her heart clutched, then eased. The fire crackled before her, the only proof of life inside. If it went out, she would drown in darkness and cold. And if Jonah didn't come back, she shoved the thought aside, tossing more wood into the flames, sweat and rain dripping together down her face. A crash shook the cabin, a piece of roofing tore loose, water bursting inside and spraying sparks. Eliza gasped, shielding the fire with her body, fumbling for dry kindling to throw in. Smoke rose, flames sputtered, then leapt back strong. Her arms ached, but she would not let that fire die. For once in her life, she wasn't just surviving for herself, she was fighting for this place, for him. Time warped, minutes felt like hours, every second measured by thunder and her pounding pulse. Then at last the door slammed open. Jonah burst through, soaked to the bone, water streaming from his jaw, breath heaving but steady. "Roof's tied down," he said, voice hoarse but firm. "It'll hold." Eliza stood frozen, relief surging so hard her knees almost gave way. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but all she managed was to press a dry cloth into his hands. His fingers brushed hers as he took it brief, unintentional, but it sent a tremor through her chest. He sat near the stove, shoulders relaxing as his breath evened out. Eliza sank opposite, eyes fixed on the fire, emotions tangled tight. The storm still raged outside, but inside the cabin they had fought it together, he on the roof, she at the hearth. And in that moment, she understood trust wasn't built by promises, but by choices. Jonah had risked his life to hold the roof. She had guarded the fire through the dark. Somewhere between lightning and thunder, a bond had been forged. The storm howled, yet Eliza no longer trembled the way she had before. What filled her chest wasn't fear anymore, but a fragile, certain faith, perhaps, from this night forward. Her life truly had begun to change. After the storm, Cedar Bluff lay in silence. The ground was soaked, grass flattened, the air still sharp with the smell of mud. But the little cabin stood firm, its roof lashed down, tight. The fire inside still glowing red. Eliza looked through the window and saw Jonah out by the fence, checking where the water had washed against the posts. The dim morning light lay across his shoulders, turning his solitary figure into something unshakable. When he came inside, water streaked his pants and rope burns marked his hands. Eliza set down a basin of hot water. Without a word, she dipped a cloth and pressed it to the raw skin. Jonah stiffened, unused to anyone's touch. But then he let her. His eyes stayed on the fire, breath slowing. "War leaves more than scars," he said hoarsely, voice low, as if speaking to himself as much as to her. "Years in the cavalry took too much. My brother, my farm, even the sense of having a place to go back to." Eliza's chest tightened. She knew that loss. She had lived it in her own way, wandering town to town. Never wanted, never belonging. "I thought I had nothing left too," she whispered. "Every town was just another stop to be turned away. Nobody kept me. Nobody remembered my name." The distance between them shrank. No longer just a soldier and a ruined woman, but two souls carved hollow by life. In the flicker of firelight, Eliza saw something shift in his eyes, less steel, more softness, like the frost giving way to thaw, day after day. Their silence changed. It wasn't empty anymore. Each glance lingered longer. Each brush of hands left behind a charge that stayed. When Eliza carried blankets out to the line, Jonah's gaze followed her a moment longer than it should. When Jonah sharpened his knife by the stove, Eliza stitched by lamplight, stealing glances at the veins running across his strong hands. One afternoon, as she stood on a chair to hang a blanket, Eliza lost her balance, Jonah's arm shot out, catching her waist. For a breath they froze, close enough to feel each other's breath. Heat rose in her cheeks as she pulled back, but in his eyes she saw no hunger, no claim, only concern, and something deeper, unspoken. That restraint, that refusal to take, moved her more than any sweet words ever had. At night, when the wind whistled through the cracks, Eliza lay under the quilt, listening to Jonah shift on the floor by the stove. His steady breathing lulled her in ways she couldn't explain. In the mornings, the fire was already burning, the smell of coffee in the air, and she felt as if a piece of normal life had been returned to her. They rarely spoke of the future, but with each passing day, the fragile seed of trust inside Eliza grew stronger. Jonah did not offer empty promises, but something better: safety. A place where no one looked at her as a burden. No one laid hands on her. No one demanded she beg for scraps. In the silver wash of moonlight, Eliza whispered to herself, perhaps fate had led her here to a man broken in his own way, yet still strong enough to give her shelter, to rebuild something neither thought possible. And in the warmth of their quiet, a feeling without a name was taking root, rising slowly but surely, lighting the corners of her heart that she had once thought would stay dark forever. That night, the fire in the stove had burned down to embers, yet the air in the cabin felt charged with a heat that came from elsewhere, something long held back. Eliza sat at the table, finishing the last stitch on her mended dress. Jonah sat near the window, his broad hand steady as he drew the whetstone across his knife. The lantern light cut sharp across his face, tracing every line carved there by war and years alone. Neither spoke, but when Eliza lifted her eyes and caught his, silence broke in its own way. She found herself rising, leaving the chair behind without realizing it, until she stood before him. Jonah's breath drew deep, his eyes carrying what he had kept locked away. The kiss came slow, cautious, like they feared it would vanish if they reached too fast. Lips met lips, tasting of tears and of longing held too long. No claim, no rush, just the quiet admission that they needed each other. Eliza trembled in his arms, but not from fear. For the first time, it was from the sheer weight of joy. When they parted, Jonah's forehead rested lightly against hers. His voice was rough, low. "You don't know all of me yet." Eliza searched his eyes and nodded for him to go on. He spoke of it then, the 3 years as a cavalry scout, the hunts through hostile country, the death of his brother on a blood-soaked ridge in Tennessee. He spoke of coming home to ashes, his farm burned, nothing left but a stone marker. His voice faltered when he said, "After that, there was nowhere to call home, just war in my head, and nights too long to count." Eliza's hand tightened over his, the rough calluses biting her palm. "But you're here now," she whispered, "and so am I. Maybe that's enough." Jonah drew a breath, then stepped to the old wooden chest against the wall. From it he pulled a small box, edges worn smooth by time. He set it on the table, his eyes steady yet softened. When the lid opened, a simple brass ring lay inside, dulled with age yet still whole. "It was my mother's," Jonah said, voice low but firm. "I've carried it all this way, not to cling to the past, but waiting for a reason to stop roaming." He reached for her hand, her small fingers trembling inside his larger, scarred palm. "If you want, you can wear it. Not as a debt, not as a bargain, as a promise. I choose you. I want you to choose me." Eliza's throat closed. For so many years she had known only the sneer of men, the filthy bargain in their eyes. Never had anyone spoken to her like this with honor. Tears spilled freely, but this time they were clean, burning away the old shame. "Jonah," her voice was barely air, "I have nothing to give back." "You have yourself," he answered, his eyes bright in the firelight. "That's enough." Her answer was a nod, fierce and sure. Jonah slid the ring onto her finger. It was a little loose, but it fit in every way that mattered. Eliza looked down, her hand shaking, then laughed through her tears. The sound was new, light, rising in the little cabin like sunlight breaking a storm. Jonah watched her, the corners of his mouth lifting into a rare smile. His hand cupped her cheek. His lips found hers again, this time deeper, steadier, carrying the weight of a vow unspoken. That night, the cabin glowed with more than firelight. Eliza lay beneath the old quilt, fingers brushing the ring, her heart overflowing. She was no longer the broken woman trembling in Red Hollow's alley. She was Eliza, the woman Jonah Creed had chosen not out of pity, but out of love growing strong between two scarred souls. And in that moment, both of them knew, from now on, neither would walk alone. The next morning, the sky over Cedar Bluff stretched wide and bright, washed clean after the storm. The ground was still damp. Water pooled in the low grass, but the early sun poured gold across everything it touched. Eliza opened the cabin door, stepping onto the wooden porch, drawing in the sharp, fresh air. Her hand brushed the ring on her finger, its cool, solid weight reminding her this was no dream. Jonah was already outside, tightening the saddle cinch on Ranger. He looked up at her, his eyes steady, the same as always. Yet something had changed the way he looked at her now, without turning away. "We've got to ride," he said. "Won't take long." They set out across the open land, Eliza seated behind him, her arms around his waist, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats beneath them. For the first time in years, she did not fear riding back into a town. The horizon was wide, the wind tangled her hair, and instead of dread, she felt the quiet strength of being carried forward. The town they entered was small but bustling, filled with the noise of wagons and chatter, but not with the sharp, mocking stares she had known in Red Hollow. She held Jonah's hand as they stepped into a plain, pine-walled office, papers stacked high on the desk, pipe smoke drifting in the air. Behind it sat Thaddeus Pike, county clerk. Jonah didn't waste words. He placed Eliza's hand in his and said, "Clear as a bell. My name is Jonah Creed, and this is my wife, Eliza Creed." The scratch of pen on the ledger rang louder than thunder when the names were written. Eliza's eyes blurred with tears. She had never thought her name would stand alongside anyone's in honor. Yet here it was not as a debt, not as shame, but as a wife, as a partner. They left hand in hand, crossing the street under curious eyes, but no one spoke. Jonah walked with a soldier's stride, and Eliza lifted her chin. In the bright noon sun, their shared name was a shield. Back at Cedar Bluff, the cabin felt new. Jonah fixed the window frame, while Eliza hung the curtains she had sewn from pale blue cloth. Light filtered through the stitching, scattering across the wooden floor like shards of hope. She ran her fingers over the fabric, her heart trembling at the thought of a future she could touch. Jonah sharpened his axe, each steady stroke ringing through the cabin. It was the sound of preparation, of a man ready to guard what he had built, not just a shelter of wood, but a home rooted in honor. That evening, they sat across from each other in quiet contentment. No words were needed. Each glance, each small smile was enough. The wind outside whispered across the grass, no longer threatening, but singing like background music to their new beginning. Later, under a sky heavy with stars. Eliza stood on the porch. Jonah stepped beside her, laying a coat over her shoulders. "This house," he said softly, "it isn't just mine anymore. It's ours." Eliza turned to him, her chest filling with peace. "And we'll keep it," she said firmly. From a woman cornered in an alley of Red Hollow, Eliza had become Eliza Creed, wife, partner, and keeper of a home. And Jonah, once a drifting scout haunted by war, now had reason to stay. The fire they built each morning, The blue curtains swaying in the window, the edge of an axe honed sharp. These simple things marked the beginning of something new. Not loud, not grand, but strong, like stone beneath their feet. Their story carries a truth worth remembering. Dignity can be restored, hope can be rebuilt, and even from the darkest nights, a new dawn can rise. If you followed the story this far, let us know in the comments what you think Jonah and Eliza should do next. Should they stay in Cedar Bluff and build a life on this land, or ride on to a new town, carrying their name into a fresh start where no one knows their past? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of the frontier, where hardship meets redemption, and love grows like a flame against the wind. Every bit of your support keeps tales like Jonah and Eliza's alive.